Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate. I would say that one of the most important and fundamental aspects of religion that it addresses the whys. Science addresses the hows, but this really is the realm of our religious traditions. And the Quran is, I think, very clear that tribulation is part of life on earth. There's a verse in the Quran that devout Muslims recite every day, which says, "Glory be to the one who created everything in opposites." And one of the ways that we know and appreciate what we have is by experiencing the opposite of what we have. An Arab proverb says that health is a crown on the healthy that only the sick can see. And so, often we take blessings for granted. We don't really think about what we have. And it's the times of tribulation that really causes us to remember what we had. We're a very complaining species. We whine a lot. We really forget to be grateful. And one of the most important verses in the entire Quran is that if you're grateful, God will increase you in your blessings. But let the ingrates know that blessings can be lost and chastisement can be severe. The other thing that in our tradition, there's a verse in the second chapter that says, God will test you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and diminishment of lives. So give glad tidings to the people who are patient, who when they are afflicted, they say, we belong to God and to God we return. Those have mercy upon them. And so when the Prophet was asked about plagues, he was actually asked about plagues. What were they? And he said that they are an invasion of the unseen world upon you. And then he said, but they're a mercy for believers. And I actually, in these days that because we've all got more time than we usually have. I mean, my brother, who's a lawyer for the state of California, suddenly he said, I've got 2 hours every day because he was commuting to San Francisco. So a lot of people are finding time. So I read a book that was written in the 14th century by a Palestinian scholar called The Virtues of Plagues and Epidemics. And it was all about the blessings that come with these grave tribulations. And one of our great scholars said, it's important in every tribulation to see 3 blessings. It could be worse. It's in your worldly matters and not your otherworldly matters. And it's this in this life and not in the next life. And that's reason to be grateful. From the Islamic tradition, it's probably closer to the book of Job, which is a good book to read for people these days. Because Job was a good and righteous man, and yet God tested him because the challenge was that he was only good and righteous because he had all these blessings. So if the blessings are taken away, then let's see how he behaved. And Job, and this is one of the purposes that my tradition gives for tribulation, is that it's for you to see who you are and to reveal yourself during those times. Humility, that this should be a time, and this one of the purposes of suffering is that it engenders and it activates these virtues within us. And one of them is the virtue of vulnerability and how we respond to that by being humbled and recognizing that. Helen Keller said that the world is indeed filled with suffering, but we can never forget that it's also filled with the overcoming of suffering. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing. They said there's an unprecedented coalition of doctors all over the world working together, which is amazing. And I think one of the things about these situations is that you really see the best and sometimes the worst of humanity. But people talk about the social isolation, but there's actually a lot of connectiveness that's happening now. People are calling people they haven't called in a long time and checking on how people are who have elderly neighbors. I've been called several times because now I'm elderly, I guess, but people called me several times asking, you're one of our elders. Do you need any help? Do you need? So I think that's one of the benefits of times like these. Mystics love nothing more than isolation. We have an entire tradition of anchorites who actually left the world in order to be more contemplative. And we have wonderful stories of the church fathers. Thomas Merton talks about these church fathers out in caves in Egypt that fled the world. One of the, in our tradition, the Prophet Muhammad said, towards the latter days, cling to your homes because there would be so much foulness. And one of the things that I've noted here is the air has just cleared up wonderfully. And it's quite stunning. We've had rain since the quarantine started. We haven't had rain for months, and we just got all this rain. And the first day of the quarantine, I went out and saw the most extraordinary double rainbow that I've ever seen. And I just felt expanded by that experience of just hope. So I think there's a lot of blessings that will come out of this. I have the same concerns that everybody else does. I think there are people that are suffering, the people that don't have the wherewithal to afford a week out of work, let alone 2 months, 3 months. Terrible. So, I mean, that's undeniably a very serious consideration. In the Quran, it says that the human being was created in a state of anxiety. And we see that with the child when it first comes in the world. It was in the nice womb. Everything was wonderful. Nice temperature, the food was coming in, and suddenly it's in this terrifying place. But then the breast comes and the child's at peace. And one of the things that I used to do with my children, I have 5 boys, but I used to throw them up in the air, and they would love it until it got to the point where gravity came in, and they well, it was always acting on, but the point when right before they came down, they would suddenly be in this complete panic. But then when they saw they were coming back to me, they kind of suddenly became happy and cheerful again. And times like these are those moments of panic where you have to remind yourself that we're in good hands. And that is trusting God. And I think for people of faith, this is really our practice. And I know Robbie and Dr. Cornell, and I'm sure the rabbi, people that practice their faith every day, that's the exercise for times like these. Just like an athlete exercises for the competition, these are the times when our faith is tested, and that's why the preparation is so important. And so for people who don't have a practice, I think these can become very, very difficult times. But trusting God, it's every day. Our prophet said, if you wake up in the morning, don't expect to see the evening. And if you go to sleep at night, don't expect to see the morning, because we're all in a state of uncertainty. And the point, the readiness, as Hamlet said, is all. The point is to be vigilant and be aware that life is temporal and it's very fragile, and we have to really appreciate it while we have it, be grateful for it, and honor it in others. Around the world, there aren't healthcare systems. I lived with Bedouin in West Africa. If you got sick, there was no 911 to call. You either got well or you died. And I think we have to be immensely grateful, because we've got Uyghur internment camps, we've got the Kashmiris in shutdown. I mean, there's a lot of places where the suffering, this is not new to them. What we're going through, is far less than what many, many places have been going through for quite some time, and many of us have been blind to it. So I think it's a time also to remind ourselves. I think this is a great opportunity, one, to recognize how out of balance we are in our lives. I think people don't realize just how stressful a lot of modern life is in the United States. This is a time to really, it's like I told a rabbi friend of mine, Alon, who called me the other day, that this is like a 2-month Sabbath for us. So, I mean, there really is something to think deeply about. In times like this, it's permitted to cancel, because preservation of life is one of the 5 universal. Actually, Robbie George wrote about this in a wonderful essay about the purposes of religion, and he pointed out that preservation of life, which concurs with our tradition, is one of the most important and fundamental ideas, and also that for the greater good, the individual will sacrifice. So for Muslims now, most of the countries are saying not to congregate. There are some scholars, there's always going to be difference of opinion. Like the Jewish tradition, you get 3 rabbis or 3 imams, you have 4 opinions. Truth to that. So there are some dissenters that want people to go to Jummah, but the Quran says ask experts, and so in this case we have to defer religiously to the epidemiologists who are telling us what to do. I just wanted to say that in our tradition, there's a verse in the Quran, God will not be asked about what God does, but you will be asked about what you do. So as devout Muslims never question the judgment of God or the circumstances that God puts us in. We're just told to respond in the best way. So I think to pray for the people.
Right.
My own son is working in an ambulance, taking older people. So he worries about just being infecting anybody. So I think praying for these people, because they really are the heroes in this situation. And Dr. Aisha Subhani, who Dr. George knows, I mean, she's seen some of her colleagues succumb just because they've been exposed.
Oh my.
Yeah, and so just keeping them in our hearts and prayers, because they really are extraordinary people. Many of them are going above and beyond, and so praying for them, I think, means a lot to them, as well as hopefully God hears our prayers. I think also the poets have a lot to offer us. There's a poem by Rumi where he says, this being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected guest. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably, maybe clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them all at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And I think there's an immense amount of truth to that, is to recognize the gifts that come with the trials also.